Shalom. The Apostolic portion to go along with the Torah portion Noah is 1 Peter 3:13 through 22, and we'll be looking at the New American Standard Version from 1995. It says, "Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good?" And why is this selected for Parashat Noach, or the Torah portion called Noah? Is because Noah endured a wicked generation, but held to the word of the Lord by faith and was obedient. And as we learn in 2 Peter, he was a preacher of righteousness, even though he was oppressed from all the rest of humanity. So Noah's going to be an example that Peter will get to later in our verse. But the answer, of course, is no one can harm you. Who is there to harm you if you prove zealous for what is good? And then he continues, "But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed." And again, Noah's going to be the example that Peter brings our attention to. And then he cites Isaiah. "Do not fear their intimidation. Do not be troubled." And the citation from Isaiah continues actually, "But sanctify the Lord in your hearts." Well, guess what? Peter tells us that Adonai is Mashiach, is Yeshua. Sanctify the Messiah as Adonai in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence. Again, Noah will be the type that Peter brings our attention to, but this is true for all of us. "And keep a good conscience, so that in the thing in which you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Messiah will be put to shame." And indeed, those that mocked Noah definitely were put to shame. "For it is better, if God should will it so, that you suffer for doing what is right rather than for doing what is wrong. For Messiah also died for sins, once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to God, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which Spirit he also went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who once were disobedient, when the patience, or makrothumia, the patience of God, kept waiting in the days of Noah, during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water." Now, some read this as saying that when Yeshua died, he descended into hell to preach to spirits in prison. But that's a popular, probably the dominant paradigm for reading this passage. But I'm of the opinion that verse 19 refers to the Spirit of the Messiah in Noah through Noah's preaching, and that Noah was equipped. Back to our context here. Noah had the Messiah sanctified in his heart, and he was ready to give a defense. Noah, as we learn from Hebrews 11, by faith, he was warned of God, and he kept that word. That is sanctifying the Messiah in his heart. And he was a preacher of righteousness. That means he endured the hostility against him in that generation for the hope that God had put before him. And this corresponds to our new birth in Yeshua, it says. So verse 21, corresponding to that, baptism now saves you, but not the removal of dirt from the flesh, but an appeal to God for a good conscience through the resurrection of Yeshua the Messiah, who is at the right hand of God, having gone into heaven, after angels and authorities and powers had been subjected to him. So how is it that this baptism has to do with this being brought safely through? Brought safely through. Well, if we learn from all the passages that talk about baptism, such as Romans chapter 6, which is a major one, that baptism is an expression. It is a washing through water that is representative of our identification with Yeshua, that we indeed died with him on the cross, and that still attached to him in his resurrection, we are risen with him, like it says in Colossians 3, verse 1 rather, that we are seated with Messiah above. It means that we were already the objects of God's love before the death. That means when it is said that I am crucified with Christ, that means what that means is not that I just chose Jesus now someday way down on the line of history, but rather that when Yeshua went to the cross, he had me in particular in mind, and all the elect, that he had held them to himself through his godly, perfect, holy, infinite love. And he went through death, and he rose again, still holding to us, and we are reckoned as having died. And that a baptism is an expression of that transition. Just as Noah was beloved of God before the flood, and God saved him through the flood to the other side, so that is a picture of our redemption in Messiah, that we are objects of his love before death, before the baptism, but we go through the death, through the baptism, that is through identification with Messiah. It's not our own choice. We don't choose to die with Messiah. He either died for us already or he didn't. And if you have faith, if you trust in Yeshua, it means that he died for you. And you can't lose that because that's his grip on you. That's not your grip on him. So just as Noah was righteous and was saved through, so too, by Yeshua's grace, he bound us to himself by his love and then went to the cross and died. And we died with him. And that is how our debt was paid, our death debt due to sin. And when he rose from the dead, we too are still attached to him by his grace and by his love and his might. That is the picture here of that the Apostle Peter is communicating. And that's why we contemplate this passage here when we read the Torah portion called Noach, or Parashat Noach. Shalom.